Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to this fireside chat. As already alluded to, I've got the great honor and pleasure of having Philip, CTO of Neo4j, on stage with me. And obviously, with Neo4j, we have a very topical AI company on the infrastructure layer. So I'd love to start off by getting right into a topic that not just hopefully as me as an investor, but for many people out there is very much top of mind. SaaSapocalypse, or the end of SaaS driven by AI. Neo4j is serving some of the largest software vendors out there in the world, and at the same time also powering many of the AI native companies. With your insights, I'd love to understand, is Wall Street getting something wrong? And please say yes.
So as the cost of writing code approaches zero, and of course SaaS is code, you have to ask, well, okay, what's the differentiation? What's the moat? And so what are the risks? The risk is if you're a startup or if you're any SaaS company, number one, the risk is that your customer can vibe code your app and therefore doesn't need to buy it. And then if you're a startup or any SaaS company for that matter, the other risk is that another SaaS company with larger distribution might featureize your product and then take over the market. So how do you differentiate? So unsurprisingly, it's not code. It's number one, taking advantage of what are the network effects that I have with my data, with my customers, with my community, so that I can get people engaged. That tends to be based on data, so using your data not just to store and retrieve, but in smarter ways to provide value back to your original audience, but then perhaps to package up some products to create for other audiences. And then another one, of course, and this has always been the case, really being obsessed about the problem that you're solving, having incredible UX, so not just the UI, but the end-to-end experience that comes out of understanding and mastering a particular domain and the problem that you're trying to solve. And if you're trying to solve a problem that exists across many companies in a given sector or across sectors, let's say payroll, yes, a company can vibe code a payroll app, but there's all kinds of risks that come with getting payroll wrong. And at the end of the day, even if a company were to vibe code something like payroll, it's only going to be as good as, it's going to be average. And if I put myself in the buyer's shoes, I have the choice between creating something average for myself and then assuming all the risks, or just letting someone else do it and doing a fantastic job. So UX, domain mastery. And then the other thing to consider is there's a set of requirements today in the AI world that's different from those in the past from a non-functional perspective. Security, compliance, privacy, the bars for those have really gone up. Also availability, if you vibe code something, like it might not be highly available, it might break. Also, companies don't want their data locked inside of a silo, which then becomes your application. So how do you avoid data getting locked into a silo? It's having API access to your data so that companies wanting access to your data through all their different agents can do so without without feeling like they need to repatriate the data. And then last but not least, end users of applications already today are AI agents, not just people. And so making sure that your workflows, your pricing model, et cetera, accommodate AI agents as users, not just humans as users.
Yeah. Data, you just spoke about it at length. It's a data differentiator, a data advantage. But at the same time, not every data is equal. And almost more importantly, you spoke about silos. Not every data is accessible. Again, for the benefit of this audience, leveraging your knowledge without too many technological terms here, how do you think about the Agentic Data Stack? How do you ensure that we can actually move from POCs with siloed agents, which is pretty much what we've been doing in 2025, now 2026, real-life production and agentic workflows?
So to answer that question, let's go through what do agents need in order to be able to operate? Because we think about what an agent's goals are, what we want out of it. Ultimately, it's all defined by data. And agents need the access to the latest data. So that means that you're limited insofar as a model itself can have access to the latest data. And actually, let's take this case more broadly, because you could say, in the age of AI, I can train my own model, and my model is ultimately trained out of data. But you quickly come to the conclusion that it's not enough to, you need a database alongside the model. The model only has the data up to the last time it was trained. Anything it's been trained on is fair game for use, so privacy, security is all pretty much out the window. There's no explainability and there's no option for determinism. So assuming now I've concluded I need some kind of dedicated data platform that can run underneath the agent alongside the LLM, then number one, because you need the latest data, you need to be able to have write access and low latency transactional access. So that's number one. Number two is, of course, with AI, you benefit not just from structured data, but from having unstructured data and semi-structured and bringing those two together. That's another one. Third, I talked about silos. You want agents to have optionality to be able to use all the data that is at the company's disposal, not just what happens to be in a silo. So you need to be able to bring your silos together and bridge them in some way. You also need privacy, security, governance, options for explainability, and so on. And then you also need, need access to a RAG corpus, so being able to do for unstructured text, to be able to do vectors for conceptual similarity. It turns out in the graph world, there's another kind of vector for topological similarity. Does this particular actor in the system behave like a fraudster, like a bot, like a high-value customer, like a normal customer, et cetera? And then I'll also say, ideally, it'd be nice if your data platform isn't just store and retrieve and transactional and covers all these things that I talked about, but can do more, can give you information about context, cause and effect from a deeper standpoint, can leverage different kinds of analytics and other forms of AI besides Gen AI. So in the algorithm that made Google stand out above their competitors in 2000 when they came out was just one algorithm called PageRank, which is essentially a graph algorithm that runs across all the different, the topology of the World Wide Web and helps them rank pages based on how popular the page is, and how popular the page is how many inbound links there are. So you can just run an algorithm, it'll do this calculation for you. That's another form of AI that's been around for a couple decades, that's incredibly effective, and that many of our customers are complementing, not just their data platform, but their LLMs and vector ranking, and there are all kinds of techniques that come out as soon as you combine these different kinds of technologies.
I just ask you not to go too technical, and I don't know, probably we lost a few people here, at least. I know many of the words that are currently being used are new terminology, and yet they're critical because they're really defining the way that we need to set up, use, adopt AI. So again, Neo4j, by coincidence or by genius design, has found itself at the epicenter of this AI transformation as the pioneer in graph technology. And we speak a lot, you just mentioned, about knowledge graph, GraphRAG, so retrieval, augmented generation, and also context. You just used the word again. Can you help us demystify a little bit those words, and why do you think, or why should we be aware that they're so critical to make the agentic world work?
Sure, yeah. Actually, it's been pretty amazing to build a product and then have a platform shift happen and be well positioned to take advantage of this. And this is obviously, as an infrastructure company, or any company for that matter, what we're all trying to do in our businesses. How do you best take advantage of a platform shift? And in our case, it turns out AI really needs context. It needs explicit context. What do I mean by context? It's in every interaction you have the subject, who's the actor in the interaction, then you have the object, and understanding all the details behind the interaction and what's this person trying to do, why, They might not tell you why, but you might be able to infer why from previous interactions and other things that they've done. And bringing that to bear into your model as part of an agentic system can give you much better answers than if you're just simply bringing back facts. And one of the things about graphs that's pretty magical is it leverages things about the real world that are not intuitive because we can't see the network around us at multiple levels of depth. There's a piece of sociological research from a book, Connected, coming out of a couple of UC Irvine professors who made the observation that if you're trying to predict a person's behavior, and let's say I A/B test it, one way is I'm going to get all the facts in the world about that person and try to predict how they're going to react to something based on those facts. And then the other is I can look at the behaviors of their friends, of their friends' friends, of their friends' friends' friends, or people that even their friends don't know. And you can better predict someone's behavior by understanding the interactions and behaviors of people 3 levels out from their social network than you can just the facts. And given that the world works this way, that the world is composed of just all these intricately intertwined systems, having a technology that lets you do that can add a lot of value. So for us, let's say, ground zero of event with Gen AI was when ChatGPT came out, everyone started using models as the only tool to solve a problem. Like something comes out that's new and magical, and you just use that, and maybe let's train with some of my own data, fine tune. And it turns out that that's good enough for certain kinds of problems, like meeting summarization and notes, maybe analyzing legal text. But then it's not good enough for a whole bunch of other use cases that I have in my business. Then people discovered vector embeddings, said, all right, I've got this one algorithm I can run that applies to unstructured text where I can map a concept in n-dimensional space and another concept and see how similar they are relative to something else. And that became a really powerful tool. And then that wasn't enough. Like that raised the bar a little bit, but you still had all these use cases that weren't getting into production. And everyone's heard about or read this MIT study from last year where 95% of AI apps weren't making it into production. Well, the ones that it really was this progression of LLMs aren't good enough, LLM split vectors aren't good enough. And the next thing people started discovering was taking a knowledge graph, taking a graph representation of your data, and having your LLM call out to it to get more context, to get more information about the cause and effect, bring it back into the decisioning, come up with a much better answer, and then that would raise the bar significantly. You also have an option in there of saying, well, I'm going to call out to my graph, and not only do I have the graph retrieve the context and let the LLM make a better decision, but I can actually delegate certain forms of reasoning. Gartner uses the term multihop reasoning, where let's say I have a shortest path across a complex network, or I'm trying to do ultimate beneficial owner in financial services where I'm going up this chain, or calculate complex permissions. If you're asking the LLM to do this, that's very much not in its sweet spot. It's probably going to get it wrong a lot of the time, and it's not explainable. So coming back to the right tool for the right job and the right kind of AI, what we also started seeing was people who would delegate out certain questions from the model, like use the model to take a human-generated question, turn it into a query, run that query in the graph, and then pass the results straight through. So in all those cases, the pattern emerged as something called GraphRAG. I wrote a piece called the GraphRAG Manifesto maybe 18 months ago or so that described it, that essentially said the next level beyond just LLMs and vectors is to use the graph. And it turns out we've accidentally built a product that solves all these requirements that I talked about for what AI agents need. It needs to be low latency, support retrieval, support writes, support structured,  unstructured, be able to bring the silos together, et cetera, and then have some analytics, data science, machine learning kind of technology alongside it. So I feel fortunate in some ways. That was lucky that we had the time to build it. No one saw AI showing up in the way that it did. On the other hand, it was maybe planned, not in the sense of imagining the way in which AI would show up, but in the sense that what we built was a technology to sell for the real world, complex, interconnected systems that is just the way the world shows up. And so it stands to reason that any new, more advanced AI technology that needs to interact with those systems would need a dedicated data platform that's designed to deal with those systems and help you make the best of them.
Yeah, no, I love this, the ability to depict the world as it really is, and the ability to give the AI a system of understanding. We need to move beyond a system of record, a system of truth, which is critical to make sure that the data is the correct one, that the data is the relevant one, but ultimately knowing how it fits into there. So as we have many startups here, I know a startup is something that's very close to your heart, close to Neo4j's heart, and you've designed a program that we discussed earlier. Why don't you speak a little bit about this, Chris? You want to get this right when you start out, and how do you make sure you get the context into your AI?
Sure. I feel, having been in the company nearly 14 years and started when we were 30 people, sub-million in ARR, I still feel like I'm in a startup, even though the company's gotten much bigger. But because we saw that many AI companies, many new startups, were actually platforming on top of Neo4j, we launched a program last August specifically for AI startups. And we've onboarded more than 600 so far, and the idea is to provide the database in the form factor that's right for startups, and to make it easy to start up both financially in terms of learnings, and then also use our network and our platform as a way for startups to get attention. And so the right form factor, because the Neo4j has been open source from the beginning, and there's a community edition. But community edition is limited in terms of what it can do. Like, it's not really designed to be a 24/7 system. And then there's the enterprise version, but the enterprise version is a prepay and not the right form factor or financial model for a startup. And as a startup, you also don't want to be managing more infrastructure than you have to. So ideally, you would want someone else to manage the infrastructure. And so the startup program uses Neo4j Aura, which is Neo4j's database as a service, where we run it for you, and then we offer some amount of credit, some amount of assistance, and then opportunities to showcase startups at our various conferences and so on.
Great.
Oh, and there are always new I saw a startup this morning just pop up who has an agentic coding application. They have like 30 coding agents collaborating together, and where they use Neo4j, and let me see if I can remember the name. I think it's called StackRight, WRIGHT, where they take all the information for all the steps, all the bugs, all the iterations, for all these agents working together. They put them into a graph, and then as they go, when there are more iterations, they can learn from each other, and one agent can learn from what the other is doing, and they can all stitch it together and be better coordinated. And there's another startup called Jupiter One. They're now a unicorn. Mm-hmm. They'd already gotten to over $1 billion in valuation, and quite a bit of success with an information security product using a different platform. And then they realized, well, cybersecurity, the whole domain is a graph. Everything is interconnected. Attackers think in graphs. If as a defender, you don't have a platform that's able to solve for attackers thinking in graphs, then you might be really limited. So in switching over, they found they were able to run things 100 times faster, which then unlocks new kinds of features and capabilities that they didn't have previously. So I love just seeing all the examples come out. Those are two.
Yeah. You just said it's been 14 years that you've been with Neo4j. You were essentially there from the beginning with Emil when it wasn't even at 1 million in ARR. Today it's a multi-billion business scaled globally. You've seen and over Shepard actually as the not just CTO but also as product lead at the time, the transformation from a on-prem organization into a cloud-native organization. Now you're doubling down on PLG because of the community you just mentioned, and you're signing partnerships with the Databricks and the Snowflakes and the Microsoft of this world. I'd love to hear a little bit, when you started off 14 years ago, what was your vision for the company and how has it evolved since? And given that Belgium, I dare to say, being Belgian myself, is a very ambitious entrepreneurial ecosystem, any kind of advice you can give to those who are looking to create a category leader, which is not as obvious when you start off in what could be considered a niche?
Yeah, the vision was always very clear, which is the world shows up as networks of computers, people, spread of ideas, biology, ecology, payments, and so on. It shows up as trees or hierarchies, whether it's org, asset ownership, supply chain. It shows up as paths and journeys through these networks, patient journey, customer journey. And so if I were to design a database management system from scratch, I would ideally design it to solve for those kinds of data sets, which are all around us, and store them as such in an abstraction or using a model that best represents those, which is actually a graph. And what we mean by graph here is nodes and relationships, just the circles and lines that any domain expert would draw their domain on a whiteboard in this way. And so there were changes happening in hardware at the time that also allowed us to design a database management system much like the brain, like nodes and relationship is much like neurons and synapses connecting them. So the idea was, instead of building a database management system, instead of following the relational model and taking that for granted, looking back and saying, well, that was actually solved for paper forms with spinning disk and kind of like hardware from 30, 40 years ago when the model was designed. Let's take advantage of modern hardware, build a system that represents and processes data like the brain and the way it shows up in the world. And so from that, all kinds of choices unfold, requiring prioritization. One is this a product? Do we just talk about it as Neo4j or whatever we want to call it? Or are we going to do a category creation play, which is way more work, but then you end up with a much bigger pie, of which then you have to fight harder to keep your own spot in the pie, to keep your own lead. But provided you can do that, the payoff is really large and it can make a bigger impact for the world. Then you say, well, how am I going to do distribution? Well, for databases, there's an expectation, at least back in the day, of open source. If we were to start today, we might have started SaaS only, but already today there's a whole bunch of swing back from the cloud to sovereign data, sovereign AI. So I feel pretty good that we have a self-managed option as well. So having all the right form factors, you mentioned the move to cloud. You also have choices like who do you go after initially as customers. Startups behave very differently from enterprise customers. Enterprise customers care much more about security and moving in predictable, much slower, controlled ways. Startups are, the kinds of features that they care about is very different. The velocity is very different. And then the go-to-market is very different. Sales cycles are very different. So in our case, we sold to both until we were maybe 20 million ARR, give or take, and we said, all right, now we need to make a choice. We need to adapt our business as well as our product to choose one or the other. So we ended up going with enterprise, and you could say conceding the startup and mid-market to the open source version up until we could then build a fully managed service initially for enterprise, and then have multiple tiers of service, including a free one, and then have a PLG motion around it, and then only then really invest in PLG. So it's just all these building blocks and all these choices along the way, which oftentimes have tensions, and oftentimes these are one-way doors. Choosing to put functionality into the open source version, once it's in there, there's no pulling it back. So if you were to put this feature in the open source version and all of a sudden your monetization decreases by 90%, then you've got a pretty big problem on your hands. On the other hand, if you don't put enough in the open source version, then it's not a meaningfully useful product. You need to keep it healthy. These balances are all tough. So I'd say my advice would be just be mindful of have your North Star. For us, it hasn't changed. What do you need to achieve your North Star? Create a category, decide what markets or segments to go after in what order. And I'll say one more thing about category creation is it can lead to some very counterintuitive decisions. For example, in the early days, there were multiple query languages for graph databases. And in fact, every new graph database that came out had its own query language. And our salespeople got used to competing with other databases and winning because our query language was a better language. Users preferred it. And so what did we do? We open sourced it, which was not a move that salespeople really appreciated. But if you look at the bigger picture, the reason SQL and the relational database category became such a big category is that you had a standard language that was both a de facto standard and also a de jure standard with ISO. So we made the investment in, first took the risk in open sourcing our language, and then made the investment in saying, let's actually go for the gold and go inside of ISO, figure out how to get into that inside of the same committee that created the SQL language, and write the 500 plus papers and language spec to ultimately churn out in 2024, for the first time in nearly 40 years, a sibling language to SQL, which is GQL, which again is a natural outcome of our ambition and the category creation strategy, and then doing what's the right thing for the customer. You don't want the customer to feel locked into your technology. You really want to be able to earn their business and re-earn their trust over time.
Yeah, no, very clear. And I guess one advice as well is patience.
Say that again.
Patience. Having patience,
yeah, patience.
As you get out, this
it
world
can take
keeps
a long
on
time.
changing,
Yeah.
creating optionality.
Less patience because we can move faster with AI now.
That is true. We only have a few minutes left, and unfortunately, we cannot give any Q&A to the audience. So I'd love just to hear any final thoughts you have, and obviously we can continue the conversation at the bar. But any final reflection as you look at this world, this never-changing, exponentially changing environment today? Anything that you would like to leave behind?
Let me make an observation about the way AI is talked about, including like in regulatory governance circles. But I also hear it among sophisticated tech people is the assumption that AI is always non-deterministic and it's always a black box. Because yes, this is true of language models, that is their inherent nature. But that doesn't mean that the larger system that you build need limit itself to these techniques or to this particular style of working. And that has some pretty important implications in terms of what bar we set. In other words, let's not lower our own bar as humans to be able to control our own destiny, have our own autonomy and agency. Ask the why. That's one of the most powerful things is curiosity and understanding. And if we lose the ability to ask the why because the AI is just serving up this decision and we need to trust it, then there's something in our humanity that gets diminished. And then we also, as stewards of the well-being of our customers, of the companies that we're working for, of the jurisdictions that we're operating in, you actually want to be able to have your cake and eat it too. Have the, use non-determinism where it makes sense. It's super powerful. I use it every day. But then also understand that you can complement that with other technologies like multihop reasoning and GraphRAG and using any number of tools and MCP servers and so on, to be able to get 100% accuracy when you need it, to use some neuro-symbolic AIs, the idea that dates back to the 90s, that you can actually have rule-based systems in addition to just purely probabilistic systems. And then as well as maintain the bar for explainability, and what that gives you is AI, not just functionality, but trust.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.